Welcome everybody. As you can see on the screen, it's Expat Talk number 10, and today we are talking about Are Remote Workers Abroad a Solution to Tackle the War on Talent? The do's and the don'ts to take into account when working with remote employees in another country. Let's go through the program. So introduction, I will talk in a minute, then we do an interactive session and a wrap up and Q&A. Please ask your questions in the Q&A, then we can answer them during this webinar, and at 11 o'clock we close this webinar. So let me quickly introduce myself since I'm talking already. My name is Marjan Stoijs and I'm working over 20 years in Untouchables. For 6 years, I'm working as a sales and recruitment manager and responsible for finding and onboarding new companies who would like to use our multilingual recruitment services of Untouchables. And I'm enjoying it very much. Netherlands has always been an attractive hub for foreign companies to set up their business and expand and target the EU, EMEA market from the Netherlands. We see companies from all over the world taking that step. Since Brexit, we see more and more companies coming over from the UK. Since COVID, we see and the ongoing scarcity for multilingual talent, we see more and more global companies either abroad or in the Netherlands looking to recruit and employ good talent who will work remote in the countries and support the business from the headquarters in, for example, the Netherlands or Belgium or elsewhere. Of course, this brings also new questions and challenges to the table on how to organize that. In this webinar, we will guide you further on how to organize working with remote workers in another country and be able to easily add that workforce to your current team without restrictions. We see in the market that the talent is often not based in the country where the business is operating from. And we think that asking talent to relocate is not necessarily needed. It should not be a deal breaker to attract this great talent to your company. We see more and more companies expanding their businesses this way and therefore beat the war on talent by being flexible and completely hybrid and completely hybrid because of that and remote. We as Untouchables can of course assist with finding that good talent, and we can help you with asking when it comes to questions about the benchmark, general ruling and regulations about how to set up a business abroad, general law questions, compensation and benefits, that's all okay. But we are, of course, a recruitment agency and our core business is recruitment. So for in-depth questions about having personal several countries and starting off business across the border, we happily refer to our partners from Interfisc. And I think it's time now to introduce our partners from Interfisc. They are expat in cross-border payroll solutions since 1972. And maybe you can introduce yourself, Katja. Welcome.
Yes, thank you, Marjan. Thank you for this introduction. I am Katja van Leeuwen. I've been working for Interfisc since 1994, so some 25 years already. And I am based at the headquarters in The Hague. At this moment, I'm responsible for marketing and business development of the Interfisc Group internationally, so for all the countries that we are active in. Just to say a bit more about what we do, we handle full service payrolls for international companies with employees abroad. And we run payrolls in 6 countries, the Netherlands, Belgium, France, United Kingdom, Germany and Italy since a few years. Most of our clients are based in another country, somewhere in the world, but they have employees in one of these 6 countries that we run the payrolls in. Most of them are not familiar with the rules and habits in the countries where their employees work. So that's where they can fall back on us, Interfisc, to help them through this. So here's something like their extended international HR department. So, Birgit.
Hello, my name is Birgit Killens. Just like Katja, I have been working for more than 25 years for Interfisc now. I started in '96 in our The Hague office. That was the only office that was there at that moment. And in '99, I moved back to Belgium, and there I helped to set up the Belgian Interfisc office. I worked for quite some years as a payroll advisor for Dutch and Belgian administrations. So I have been with the feet in the mud. And of course, that helped to set up the administrations in the other countries because you get to know the do's and the don'ts. And also, in fact, in all countries, the risks are the same. People need an employment contract, people get ill, people retire, and then you have to sort of find the equivalent in that country. Since 2013, I am the managing director of Interfisc Belgium NV, but we like to call it our international desk because in Belgium we coordinate the Belgian, French, Italian, UK and German administrations. Katja explained the profile of our clients as companies who want to set their first steps in another country. They often do not have a presence as an employer there, but the local employees work from home. And therefore, historically, often these employees were business developers, sales profiles, and also service engineers. The people for example, a Dutch company sold machinery in Germany, but this machinery has to be serviced, and then German service engineer does that for them. But since the pandemic, we also see more and more remote workers that work partly from their home. Exactly. And therefore there are some changes in their social security or fiscal situation. Yeah. Then on the side, we are also specialized in split administrations between different countries. And we see lately a lot of universities with their international teachers and professors that need our advice. And then the last field is sometimes it happens that premiums have been paid in the wrong country. And then we help employers with setting it right and with correcting in the correct country.
Yes, the market is very dynamic. There's a lot to do in this remote working, and we will go in depth through in this webinar with it. Let's first start with a poll. Thank you, Birgit. So first question in the poll, let me see. Do you currently have international team members working abroad? So please answer yes or no. I'll wait a bit and see what the answer is. Maybe we do that now. Yes, 67%, no, 33%. Okay, so it's that's a good one. So it's more and more common. In which country? That's the next question. Let's see. In which country do they work? It's nice to see an overview. Which are the main countries? Let's see the answer. Yeah, I think now everybody filled it in. See. All right. Belgium, big group, France, Germany, and then other countries inside Europe. And you can scroll down a bit, can we? Oh no, that I cannot do that. Maybe the host can scroll it down a little bit to see so other countries inside Europe and also other countries outside Europe. But I cannot see. Oh, there's 44%. See, that's also quite high. Mm-hmm. So there's a mixture of different countries. Okay, next poll question, please. Do these colleagues work abroad temporarily to eventually return to work at your office? Yes, they work temporarily abroad. No, they do not have the intention to move to where the headquarters is based. So that's an interesting question. Maybe we can see the answers. Okay, see, it's for the long term. It's for the long term. Very good. That gives a good overview. And I think it's now good to start with my first question to Katja. What aspects should you take into account when your employees work abroad?
Okay, good question. Of course, I will try to explain the basics here. It all begins with 2 steps. The first step is very important. Of course, you will have to establish in which country the employee will be subject to social security and tax. Not everybody knows how this works, obviously. We often hear that employers think that they can choose for themselves in what country they set up a payroll. But this is not the case. You will need to follow the international rules here. And for social security and tax purposes, the main rule is the country of employment principle. So an example, a Dutch company hiring an employee that lives and will be working in the UK, the employee in this situation will be subject to social security and tax in the UK, where he will also be working. And so if that all points to one country, the answer is quite simple. It's the working country principle. And there are, of course, exceptions. For example, if it's a secondment, temporary secondment situation, but that's not our scope today. So, and this webinar, we look to this permanent situation, company in one country and employee in another country.
Exactly.
So once you know in which country the rules apply, you also need to set up a payroll. And of course, a payroll that complies with all the local rules. So what does it mean? Once you know that your employee is taxed and insured in another country, for example, the UK, how does it work then? Maybe Kirsten, you can show the slide that we made. In each country, you will have to, there are some things that are similar everywhere. In each country, you will need to convert gross wages into net wages and contribute the applicable tax and social security premiums. And also in each country, there are the same type of risks. Employees may fall ill in each country, and contracts can end in each country, that's the same. But the way that each country handles this kind of risks is very different in each country. So obviously for employees, the most important thing is that they receive their salary and their pay slip in time. But on the other hand, the payslip is not more than the result of the payroll, and a payroll that is based on certain situation with conditions that were agreed upon. So how we look at it, here you see the payslip at the core of 5 areas of attention that are very important. And all these 5 areas of attention impact the creation of the payslip in each country. So I will briefly explain these 5 areas of attention. Social security, once you know that the social security in one country applies, this social security system has associated compulsory insurances. So in our UK example, the country of employment principle applies. So you just follow the local rules here in social security. For tax, it's the same. It's also the country of employment principle. So you just follow the rules as apply in the UK. Health and safety is the same, just follow the rules. And of course, for health and safety, there are administrative rules that are different in each country, but there is not much of a choice here. When we come to the employment law, we often see that employers try to use their own agreements that they are familiar with, the rules that apply in their home country, because that's what they know. We fully understand. Theoretically, this is permitted. You can do that. You, as a Dutch company hiring an employee in the UK, you can apply the Dutch law, but the employee is working in another country. So in our example in the UK, and some local employment regulations will prevail. So this may concern, for example, termination of employment or incapacity for work, company working hours. And these are mandatory provisions, and you cannot say that you do not apply those mandatory provisions because you as an employer are based in another country. So Birgit will go further into that. Here you theoretically have a choice, but in practice the choice is not very big. The area of attention where you have most of a choice is employee benefits. This will allow you to make a difference, and having additional non-statutory benefits makes it easier to attract and retain the right talents, of course. Regulations and customs with regard to employee benefits are also different in each country, of course. Included, for example, the associated tax handling of, for example, a company car or a home office allowance. But of course, we can help you to clarify these differences so that you know exactly what is common sense and what is common practice in the country where your employee is based. So even though you're not familiar with the rules yourself, we can help you to make the transition and to fully understand. So resuming, I would say that all these areas of attention revolve around the payslip, and in case something changes in one of or more of these areas of attention, the payslip will have to be adjusted. And the same goes for changes in the actual working situation. For example, if the employee moves to another country, you will have to analyze again how the situation is, go through all the areas of attention and come to a correct payslip. So like we said before, Interfisc helps you with this. And as we include these 5 pillars, 5 areas of attention into our services in these 6 countries, we help you take care of everything and make sure that it rolls smoothly in each country. So I think this is a basic theoretically explanation about how it works.
Okay, thank you very much, Katja. Okay, Birgit, I have a question for you. What next then? You found a candidate abroad. What steps are necessary?
That is the point where employers reach us. They have a contact, they have an employee, they have a plan to employ someone abroad. And they will then ask, how do I go on? I went to my local salary provider, but they cannot help me because the rules of the country where the employee lives and works will apply. And what the first step is often that you will have to be registered as a foreign employer in the other country. Of course, that is part of our services. That's the first step we will take for the employer. And we will send you a list with documents we need in order to register the foreign company in the country. Often we need some details of the company, like the register in the Chamber of Commerce or the identity card of the legal representative. We often see a certain reluctance there. In Belgium, for example, the legal representative of the company has to provide his private address. Mm-hmm. If he does not, the company will not receive a company number. So the documents and the information you have to provide may be different in Belgium or Germany or UK, but we have an extensive list with the documents and information you have to provide. And with that information, we can act as a mandatory. And that means, in fact, that for example, if we have a Dutch company who wants to employ someone in Belgium, that we register the Dutch company as a Dutch company in Belgium, but that for the authorities, our address, the address of Interfisc in Belgium, will be the first point of contact. We are then an official mandatory. And from there, we can have all the communications, all the letters, all the information from the authorities. As soon as that is settled, that is always the first step. You have to be registered as a foreign employer. So not as a company, but as an employer. In most countries, you get a company number and you get a social security number and a wage tax number. Of course, the names are different in the different countries, but the principle is always the same. And you are present as an employer with local employees. Katja referred already to the importance of the labor law. It is, as Katja already said, it's for our employers, it's always very attractive to stick to the labor law that they know. If you're a Dutch company, it's attractive to apply Dutch law because you know what it entails, but it's not wise. As Katja explained, theoretically it's possible because the Rome Treaty allows parties to choose the labor law that is applicable on their employment contract, but in practice it is not wise. It's often not wise to do so. Katja explained before that there is a European treaty that says which social security law is applicable. The rules are very clear. You cannot choose. And our advice, it's a practical advice, is to, in most cases, because you always have to look case to case, but in most cases, it is a good idea to apply the labor law of the country where the social security law is applicable. Since you cannot choose the social security law, that is where employees will have to turn to when they are, when they get unemployed, when they lose their job, when they are ill for a long time, they can't work, or when they retire. You get your benefits from the social security legislation in that country. And if you apply a different labor law from a different country, you often have discrepancies or things that are organized in a double way. And for example, a good example is payment when an employee is ill. In the Netherlands, an employer pays for 2 years. In Belgium, it's for a white collar worker, it's a calendar month. In Germany, it's 6 weeks. And so if you have put into your Dutch labor law that you will pay the employee for 2 years, while the Belgium system, the authorities will already provide a benefit from the second month. You see that there are things that do not fit together. And that is the practical reason why we say, if you have a person that works in Germany for your Belgian or your Dutch company, but the person lives and works in Germany, you cannot choose the social security, it's German. You cannot choose the wage tax, it's German. In that case, do apply the German labor law and use a specialist. Often the labor law in the countries is quite different. For example, in France, it's very strict. It has to be in French. So use a French specialist. We provide that, we have a wide network, but don't think it costs me a lot of money to have this French contract, employment contract established, because when you need it, and it's often in a conflict situation that you need it, you will be glad that you have put it onto French law, because it will save you a lot of money at that point. So we cannot stress enough, do think carefully about the employment, the labor law that you want to apply on the employment contract. Of course, in the negotiations with the employees, as Katja said, social security, tax, health and safety, it's quite clear. the Europe decides who may, which country, the legislation of which country is applicable, but then it's the internal legislation of the country that you have to follow. It is in the employee benefits that you can make the difference. Yeah? A lot of employers, we often get the questions, I want the same working conditions in all the different countries where we are present. It is a very nice fiction, but in practice, it's very difficult to realize, because you usually then end up to have to provide the employees with the best of all worlds. Yeah? In Belgium, there's a 13th month often applicable. In the Netherlands, it isn't. So employees will say, but I want a 13th month as well. But the Belgian employee will say, hey, but my Dutch colleague is paid for 2 years, his salary when he is ill. I want an insurance because in Belgium, I have 1 month that the employer pays me, and then I have less income because I get a benefit from my health insurance. So there are so many different legislations and rules that we usually advise that you put up the employee benefits that are normal in the country where the employee lives and works. For example, if you look at France, the obligatory social insurance is very expensive. Often you are, for an employer, you have about between 40 and 50% on top of the gross wage as an employer cost. But in that percentage, there is already a lot of retirement. So in France, in the legislation, a lot is included, which makes it expensive, but you do not have to organize an extra additional pension. While in the Netherlands, the AOW is often, people say you don't die, but you can live from your AOW. So there, the second pillar of the pension is very important. And that's why we always try to advise, start from the obligatory system, look in the country what you have to do there, and then what is normal in good employership to add. And that can be different from country to country.
Yeah, and then you advise on that, right?
Yeah, of course. We will tell employers, in Belgium, you do not have to do this, but a normal, good Belgian employer or a Belgian employee will expect to have that. And it might be a very important working condition to have to bind the employee towards you, because if he goes to your competitor, probably he will have that working condition there because it's a normal Belgian working condition.
And you see, looked at that per sector, per branch, what's common in the branch. I have a few questions. Did you already reach point 4, local payroll administration?
No.
I wait till you have point 4 and then I have some questions for you.
Okay. When you are registered as an employer, and you have a signed employment contract, and you have you're fine with all the working conditions, then of course you have to set up the payroll administration, and that is our core business. So in the countries we have services in, that's the heart of it. We make the salary slip with the correct social security, with the correct wage tax, and with the working conditions that you have decided on in the employment contract. We calculate all the different components of the salary, and we also make sure that they are paid correctly towards the different authorities in that country. Often we say that we are sort of a translation bureau of legislation. That we actually explain to the Dutch employer, for example, what you know as the AOW, for example, will be called RSZ retirement in Belgium, or auto-enrollment in UK. So we try to explain the equivalents in the different countries with respect to the local rules.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Shall I ask first question, which I see in the chat, in the Q&A?
Okay.
Would you advise setting up a local payroll or an employer of record when hiring more than 2 people in the same country abroad?
With us, let's say 80% of our clients have between 1 and 5 people. I think when we come to the necessity of an establishment, that I can explain a little bit more what is important there.
Yeah, so
it doesn't always have to do with how many employees you have in a country. It also has to do with the hierarchy and or what the employees do exactly in that country.
Yeah, so we will come back to that later with the poll question. Okay, the other question is, do you provide model employment agreements per country, which include the most common regulations, like payment in case of sickness, probationary period? Yeah.
We have what we call a fact sheet. And in that fact sheet, we put the most important labor conditions and like probationary periods. In Belgium, it's not allowed, for example. We put that down. We have stopped with providing model employment contracts.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that is that they are often either too basic or people start changing things in them. And it makes it very difficult for us. So we have now the principle that we have legal specialists set up the contracts. We often start from the local employment contract, the model employment contract of the company. For example, if it's a Dutch company, we take the Dutch model, and then we look what is important in that contract. In that contract, and then we translate it towards the local, especially in France.
Yeah.
We very often see in the Netherlands, for example, it's normal to work 40 hours a week. In Belgium, if you put that into a contract, you have automatically 12 extra compensation days for the employee, because in Belgium it's 38 hours. In France, it's 35. And the way you put it down is so incredibly important. And even if we provide a model contract, we often saw that in the Netherlands, the 38 hours became 40 hours. And it put a lot of, we're not, the payroll department is not a legally trained as a labor law specialist, and that's why we put it with our labor law specialist. It's too tricky, in fact, because if in Belgium you put, for example, a probationary period in a contract, it's just not there. You may think we have 2 months to look at the employment, but then in the end, you have no probationary period. So that's why we say do that with a legal specialist for the
you
company.
guide them with that. Yeah. Okay. Another question. More and more, you see companies are offering the option to work from anywhere for a couple of months per year, also in countries where they have no office or branch. Would you limit this at 2 or 3 months in total per year? How many was it? 100 and something days?
Personally, it's a very hot topic at the moment. There are different, what Katja said about the analysis, you have to make the analysis in each case. So you have to see if this person works from that country for more than 25%, then it may change the social security law. You have to look into the tax law, and there I probably hear the 183 days working in another country, which often has as a result that you have local wage tax. And of course, each situation is different. And when you allow that, before you do that, make sure that you make a good analysis on social security consequences, on wage tax consequences, but also on insurance consequences. Because what I heard or what I hear, because it's all very vague at the moment. It's with the remote working and the pandemic that this sort of questions arise. But in the case of insurances, there are often, for example, accident insurances. In Belgium and in Germany, you have accident insurances which provide the wage when an employee has an accident during work or on the way from or to work. And for example, when someone lives in the Netherlands but has a second home in Spain, these insurances might not accept that it is an accident insurance because they say they're not, it's not their usual place of work. And that's something that is often forgotten. So the last word, it's very difficult to give advice there. First, you have to analyze the situation case by case. And secondly, the insurance consequences are often forgotten. So I would be very careful if because also if you promise it to one employee, the next will follow. And in the end, you might have to, it might make it very complicated for you as an employer to manage your human resources
department. But it's one of the things which comes across often because it's because of the COVID. So if you're sort of safe within that period of 183 days, except for accident insurance and things like that, actually the answer is yes, but be careful.
And get take all 5 aspects into account. If it's not too often, if it suits you as an employer, it's possible. Of course, it's possible, but make sure that it doesn't have big consequences for you as an employer. For example, to set up a payroll administration in other countries, if that's not what you wish for, it may have big consequences on the administrative part.
I have another question. An employee is hired in a country A and after a temporary assignment in country B, she decides to stay here.
There, of course, it's also very specific, but you often have to look into rules that apply. If you send someone secondment in social security, in the social security sense, is always temporary. Secondment means that you send someone abroad for a certain amount of time with the idea that he comes back to the original country, and that therefore no change of social security legislation has to be made, because it's not the idea of the social security legislation that employees should change from country to country too often. That's why this rule for secondment is put into place. But there is a maximum of 5 years. If an employee then decides to change, to stay there, to stay in the country, you will have to set up a local payroll.
When it's time for the poll question, you need to say, Birgit, or shall we answer a few more questions?
Maybe in the time frame, it might be good too, because I think you have another question as well, and I see that I have already taken quite some time. So maybe we should do the poll.
We do the questions later. I have many questions, and thank you for that. That's really nice. So Kirsten on the background, can you start the poll? So our question to you is, do you need an establishment abroad to hire an employee? Do you think you need an establishment when you want to hire an employee abroad? What do you think? Yes or no? So let's see what everybody says. Yes or no? Clicking is very quick. The majority of the people say no.
So they have been listening very carefully. That's a very good sign.
Okay, Birgit, what's the case?
in our experience, 85 to 90% of our clients start without an establishment abroad. That is because an establishment, of course, brings obligations with it. You have to have local bookkeeping in accordance with the local bookkeeping laws. There are VAT declarations, corporate tax, and so on. And also, when this market abroad does not turn out to be as successful as you hoped for, you are stuck with an empty establishment and all the obligations that are there. But of course, it is wise to ask the question. Only yesterday, I talked to someone they provide sustainable loaders to the food industry. And for them, it was very, very important in their branch to be present in Germany. So they say we have tried it often for a long time without GmbH, but now they have established the GmbH for commercial reasons, just to get more clients, because they want it local. So that might be something why you put down an establishment.
Okay.
Also, often in care, for example, hospitals, we have that question sometimes. They want to be able to send invoices with local VAT. And you cannot send local VAT if you do not have a fiscal establishment there. So that might be a reason also. In branches of building and installations, there is often in the treaties that if this building project or the installation is longer than 12 months, you have a fixed establishment, then you cannot choose anymore. And then a very important one, when I come back a little bit to the question, if you have 2 employees, can you then still have no establishment? If there is a place of leadership, so if you have an office where there's a manager and then there is a certain hierarchy, that might be for the fiscal authorities a sort of trigger to say that you have a fixed establishment. But if you, for example, in a country like Germany, you have a salesperson in the north, one in the middle, and 2 in the south, and they have all the same, they have no authority to bind the company legally, then you can have 5 people in Germany without a fixed establishment.
Okay, that's good. I think it's good to go to Katja. Thank you, Birgit, for this story. It's very clear. And I have another question for Katja. Yeah, one might think of payrolling, for example, or for example, a company hires the employee for you. What are the pros and cons of this? Payrolling, what's in the name?
Yeah, what's in the name? Well, the name does not say that much. It's more the situation behind it that is important to check. And the most important difference between the situation that we explained with your own payroll and the other situation where you have another employer of record is that in that payrolling situation with an employer of record, it's that other employer that hires your employee. So it's that other employer who can decide upon the most important employee benefits. So whereas to the situation that we explained, it's you can decide for yourself what you want. You can apply all your branding wishes, and the employee is just your own employee. Another important difference is that it's distance, not only the physical distance, because the employee already finds himself abroad. He's not in your office with his colleagues. He's in another country, in his home office, so he's all alone. And the distance also applies may also apply in a psychological way in case this employee is not employed by you, but by another employer of record. So he might feel a bit different and apart from the other team members in the country where you are established. So I think that those are the most important things to know. And, well, another thing, many payrolling companies might sometimes say that it's not possible to hire employees without an establishment. So they automatically say that you need to go through this payrolling. That's not the case, but we know that, and I was glad to see that you know that too, most of you. But it's not the case, and with a company like Interfisc, even if it's sometimes difficult to take out extra insurances, in the Netherlands it is difficult, but we have solutions for that. So even if you're a UK company wanting to hire employees in the Netherlands, we can offer you all the same insurances as Dutch companies can take out. So there is no restriction there.
Great. Okay, very good. I think it's now a good one to talk about the onboarding when you've hired people who are purely remote working, working on a remote base for you. So maybe Kirsten can show the slide that I prepared for onboarding tips. And then later on, I will answer the Q&A questions, which are very nicely to see, and we will go through them quickly. Of course, a few open doors, but it's good to mention again that if you have a good team remote working for you, it can be the extra German speakers in Germany who give support to the Germans already working from the Netherlands, or just in general working people remote. Make sure that your onboarding is tip-top and send them warm welcome. It looks like open doors, but it's so important. Make sure that they have the equipment they need for their jobs. Make sure it's there before they start. Match new remote workers to a remote body. Create a memory first day. Share your remote work policy. Make sure you mention your culture there as well, because it's very important to share that and to make sure that the employee gets a lot about the branding and really gets to know your company and knows what the company policy and the culture is. Use a checklist for internal people and remote people to make sure everybody gets the same onboarding experience, and gather employee feedback. That's so important. So then you can update your onboarding program all the time. So that was just tips for the onboarding. And I think it's also wise to go to the conclusion to say, well, is our remote work as a solution to tackle the war on talent? I think yes, recruiting abroad and having the employees working remotely is certainly an option to, and can be the answer to tackle the war on talent and finding the right talent. Providing that the points that I mentioned earlier are taken into account. This way you can create a nice and diverse international group of employees. And when you go back to the question, you see that a lot of companies are working with this already. And one question from Ingrid is, what if employees must be included in the Dutch pension fund, whether they live in the Netherlands or abroad? Katja, Birgit?
It is a difficult question sometimes, because while often abroad the additional pension is not an obligation but a choice, in the Netherlands you often have collective labor agreements with the BTER rules, where the second pillar you don't have a choice. For us, I know that our Dutch lawyer has succeeded in some cases, because it depends on collective labor agreement to collective labor agreement or pension fund to pension fund, that if there was a Belgian social security with a Belgian additional pension, that he has succeeded to exclude them from the Dutch. I also know that there are cases where it didn't work. And for example, for the universities where I talked before, there, even though if we have teachers or professors in Germany or in Belgium and they have their social security in their home country, they still need to pay to the, what is it? It's a specific fund, pension fund for the universities. So also there it's case by case, and it depends on the pension fund. But we have had a few successes where they could be taken out.
Okay, thank you very much. Then another question. We just want to switch the employment contract, but she will have less social security coverage and additional taxes in the new country. From an employer perspective, the employer cost will decrease. What would you advise to do?
So this employee is moving to another country, which changes the system, the applicable rules, and which increases the costs. Okay.
For the
Decreases
employer.
or increases? Because when it decreases and the employee is happy, the problem is not that big.
You clap your hands, yeah. Now I just read it out again. The person will have less social coverage and additional taxes in the new country. From an employer perspective, the employer cost will decrease. What would you advise to do?
Of course, it's a bit a case again. If someone moves, it's a difficult question because sometimes we have made a comparison between the Belgian, the Dutch, and the German wage slip with reference to the employer costs and to the net wage. And then in Belgium, you're always, I will say it not very politely, screwed, because the employer will have to pay more and the employee gets less. But the question also is always, what can you do with that net wage? And if I compare my Belgian net wage to my Dutch colleagues, and I compare what my home cost is, then Belgium is certainly a lot better than the Netherlands. Yes. If I go to the supermarket, I can better go in the Netherlands. So it's a very, very, very difficult question. What we often do is that an employee is used to a certain net wage. We take it to the other country. We make a pro forma calculation to calculate that back to the gross wage in that country. We explain to the employer what the normal secondary working conditions are, and then we see what it will cost. And then we come to a certain compromise. If the gross becomes too high and the employer has to pay too much, maybe we will decrease it a little bit. But it's in fact it's maatwerk. How do you say that in English?
Tailor-made.
Yeah, it's tailor-made. It's a very difficult question to ask to answer in general. Yeah.
Also a negotiation, in fact.
Yeah, it's often
sometimes if the employee is moving on the if it's the question from the employer that the employee moves, sometimes they will provide an extra allowance, which is based on the local costs of living. So it all depends on the situation.
But again, need advice for that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay, I have another question. In relation to the employees working remotely for a few weeks, one, if a Dutch employee returns home abroad for 2 to 4 weeks, after which they will return to the Netherlands, would you apply for an A1? Or would you do it only after 4 weeks?
No, in fact, you have to do it from the first day that there is international.
Okay.
But in practice, we often see that it depends on the situation, because you can ask the A1 on 2 accounts. If you send someone for a temporary time, it's a secondment. It's another ground for an A1 than if there is a regular working in different countries.
Yeah, this is 3 to 4 weeks.
We have had a few cases in which we got a telephone call from a Dutch employer who had a Belgian employee, and he wanted to enter a Belgian industrial site, and he was refused because he didn't have an A1. In that case, an A1 is not needed because he was in Belgium. He had social security and taxes in Belgium, but he worked for a Dutch employer. But this company wanted to be sure that there was Belgian social security paid. So in that case, we have asked for a certificate from the Belgian social security office, and then he could enter the site.
So,
but it is wise to apply for them if you send someone abroad, because we see it more often that big chemical companies, industrial sites refuse for employees, and they want to see, I want to see on the A1 where the social security is due.
Yeah, because he's saying there's no policy yet from the SVB, Social Security Bank in the Netherlands, on how to deal with employees temporarily working from abroad. Local hardcore employment law benefits, for instance, health and safety kick in immediately, also for employees working abroad remotely or for a few weeks. What would you do to manage to avoid the risk? I think you just explained, do it straight away, even though, because you can encounter
also
problems.
what I have heard in a talk from the SVB a few weeks ago is even if you don't have the A1 in your possession, the fact that you have applied for it is already a first step. But the A1 is a formality. It's an important formality, but in fact, it's the rules of the treaty you have to follow. That's always the starting point. Yeah. And the A1 will confirm that the rules from the 883 treaty have been followed.
Okay, good. Another question. My experience is that when an employee abroad performs commercial sales task, an establishment is necessary. Do you share that thoughts? Of course, it was asked before we explained.
Yeah. What is very important, if that was true, Interfisc would lose 80 to 90% of its clients. But what is very important is that where the decisions are made about prices, about the sales and so on, that stays abroad. If the employee in the country itself gets too much power or gets the authority to bind the company in a legal manner, then you can have a personal fixed establishment. So you have to be careful there that the decision making is not with the employee.
Exactly, that's clear.
That is also why it's, for example, important. Because our legal specialists, they know the situation. They will put the employment contract specifically for that situation, and they will put that down in the employment contract, that the employee is not allowed to bind the company.
Okay,
that is put in there to avoid the risk of a personal fixed establishment. But it's of course not the words, but the practice that is important.
Yeah. A long, quick question. Oh, sorry. Because I have to...
just a quick one. It differs there are some countries that look at it in a different way. For example, in France, you can only do marketing, commercial activities without an establishment for a certain period of time.
For about 2 years.
Yes, so just be careful with the things that Birgit said. Decision making must point to the company abroad. That's very important.
Yeah. But also there, even though we say that to all our clients, we have clients that are without a fixed establishment in France for 10 years now, and there has been no problem whatsoever. But still, you have to be careful, because once the fiscal authorities will find it interesting, they might say, you have been developing for 10 years now, it's time to have a fixed establishment. We do not accept that anymore. But in practice, we haven't had seen it so far, but we do advise to be careful there. If you are present in France for a certain time, it's a good idea to start thinking about a fixed establishment. Yeah.
Okay, another one. A Belgian company hired a Dutch resident. Before COVID, this employee was working 100% in Belgium. After COVID, the employee is working
from home
1 day from home in the Netherlands. Let's say Social Security remains in Belgium. Does the Belgian company need to set up a payroll in the Netherlands? Same question for Dutch hiring, working in 1 day.
Pandemic is overmacht. I'm not sure how you say that in Dutch. And there are agreements between Belgium and the Netherlands with the fiction that the situation is still the same as it was before the pandemic. But you have to be careful. At a certain point, this agreement will stop, And if you then leave the situation of the remote working, then you will have to change. But as long as the agreement between Belgium and the Netherlands is there was also one between the Netherlands and Germany and between Belgium and Germany. So far, at this point, you are safe because they agree that the situation is in a fiction as it was before the pandemic. If you hire a new employee, you have to, then now you know that there is COVID, then you have to apply the normal rules.
So it's 11 o'clock and I have 4 more questions, but also a question which we can answer in the emails later, like I would like a personal appointment. Can I give my Dutch employee a Belgian car? I don't know.
Very interesting question.
I think so, yeah.
You can, but.
Exactly, we will advise. And of course, about immigration. So that's a bit too long for now, but really nice. And thank you everybody for joining this webinar and be so active with questions that made it very interactive for us. And also good to know that the topic is very now and very, very interesting for a lot of companies to work with. And we hope that we could help you further with this. And I would like to thank Katja and Birgit for today. And
my pleasure.
yes, and for everybody, I wish you a nice weekend. And of course, we will answer the questions and everybody will get a recording. So, and indeed, personal contact with either us for the recruitment and for Interfisc for all the legal questions and transferring to another countries, please, we will make sure you get the contact details. Okay, thank you very much and have a nice weekend ahead. Thank you. Bye.